Think being a pharaoh was all gold and glory. Think again. These so-called gods on earth worked harder than your average modern CEO. Greek historian Diodorus even wrote that pharaohs had to follow strict daily prescriptions, a schedule packed with rituals, endless meetings, and the kind of political drama that could end with a harem conspiracy, like the one that killed Ramses III. Forget lounging on thrones, they were stuck juggling temple politics, border disputes, and a palace full of advisors, family, and bodyguards. Privacy? Not a chance. And those elaborate wigs and beard accessories? Just another part of the uniform. This video uncovers the exhausting, high-stakes reality behind the hieroglyphs, one where even a divine ruler needed an alarm clock. The truth is, being treated like a god in ancient Egypt meant following a schedule that would make most people want to crawl back under the covers. Diodorus wrote that a pharaoh's life was regulated by strict laws, every hour accounted for, every action mapped out in advance. These rulers didn't just rule, they performed. Their days were packed with duties that went far beyond sitting on a throne and looking majestic. Let's start with the morning. Before the sun even cleared the horizon, the pharaoh was expected at the temple. This wasn't a casual visit or a chance to meditate. These were mandatory rituals, anointing ceremonies, and sacrifices that kept the universe in balance. According to Diodorus, these acts were essential for maintaining order in Egypt. If the pharaoh couldn't show up in person, his statue stood in for him. The message was clear. The king's presence, real or symbolic, was needed to keep the world from slipping into chaos. Skipping these rituals wasn't an option. The belief was that neglecting them could anger the gods, tip the delicate balance of Ma'at, and invite disasters like famine or unrest. After the rituals, the day moved straight into business. The first meeting often happened before breakfast. Advisors brought petitions, foreign envoys waited their turn, and scribes stood by to record every decision. Diodorus called these responsibilities mandates, and that's exactly what they were. The pharaoh had to resolve disputes, sometimes over borders, sometimes over harvests, knowing that a single misstep could threaten stability. Even the smallest choice was loaded with meaning, and everyone was watching for signs that the king's authority might be slipping. And forget any idea that their divine acts were spontaneous. Pouring sacred oils or making offerings wasn't about mystical inspiration. It was paperwork, just another duty on a long list sandwiched between tax debates and infrastructure problems. Every ritual, every public appearance was scheduled and scrutinized. The pharaoh couldn't afford to look bored or tired. If he yawned during a ceremony, it might start rumors that the gods had turned their backs on Egypt. That kind of gossip could be dangerous, especially when people like Ramses III's wife were plotting in the shadows. No part of the day was safe. Family dinners were more like tense political meetings with the constant threat of betrayal hanging in the air. The pharaoh wasn't just a leader, he was a high priest, a judge, and a crisis manager all rolled into one. By midday, he'd already juggled more roles than most people handle in a month, and every move was a performance for the court and the gods. But before he could face the crowds or make any big decisions, there was another daily challenge waiting, getting ready for the day ahead. And for a pharaoh, even that was a spectacle. Getting ready for the day as a pharaoh started early and took serious effort. While most people barely managed to brush their teeth before work, a pharaoh's morning kicked off with a lengthy spa-like ritual. Servants handled every detail, from preparing a bath to rubbing fragrant oils onto the ruler's skin. This wasn't just about smelling good. Oils were a symbol of status, and some, like Hatshepsut, used rare scents to send a clear message. Only a pharaoh could afford this level of luxury. But the real centerpiece of the morning was the hair. Wigs in ancient Egypt weren't just for style, they were law. The higher your status, the more elaborate your wig. Slaves weren't allowed to wear them at all, while pharaohs wore masterpieces woven from human hair and decorated with gold or silver threads. These wigs signaled power before a word was spoken. Every strand had to be perfectly in place. Stylists, yes, there was a team, made sure nothing looked out of order. A crooked wig could mean rumors about the pharaoh's health or even his right to rule. And then came the beard wig. This wasn't actual facial hair, but a braided accessory strapped on for official events. Beard wigs symbolized divine power and were required at ceremonies. The longer and more ornate the beard, the more it hammered home the idea that the pharaoh wasn't just a man, he was a living god. These accessories weren't optional. They were performance pieces to project divinity. After the hair and beard wigs were set, it was time for dressing. Layers of crisp linen tunics, heavy jeweled collars, and stacks of gold bracelets turned the pharaoh into a walking billboard for royal authority. Even the color of the clothing mattered. Ramses II, for example, wore blue armor not for protection, but to stand out. The message was clear. The person under all this fabric was untouchable. Every detail was part of the act, from the crook and flail held in each hand, symbols of shepherding and punishment, to sandals decorated with images of enemies. So every step made a statement. Makeup finished the look. Thick lines of kohl around the eyes protected against infection, but also gave an otherworldly stare. Red ochre on the cheeks added a healthy glow, copying the look of the gods. Nothing about this was casual. It was all designed to make the pharaoh seem superhuman, someone you obeyed without question. By the end of this ritual, the pharaoh was transformed, ready to be seen, ready to be worshipped, and, most importantly, ready to rule. But looking the part was only the beginning. The next task was far more stressful, facing the steady stream of people needing decisions, often before breakfast. Courtroom drama in ancient Egypt wasn't a show for the faint of heart. The pharaoh sat at the center, surrounded by advisors and scribes, as everyone from farmers to nobles brought their disputes straight to the palace. These weren't just petty arguments. Every case was a test of the king's ability to uphold ma'at, the principle of truth and order that kept Egypt running. If the pharaoh ruled unfairly, it wasn't just his reputation on the line. The whole universe could tip into chaos, or so people believed. Picture two villagers fighting over a patch of land. It sounds simple, but the wrong call could start a chain reaction. Taxes might go unpaid, neighbors could stop trusting the king, or worse, a small feud might turn into a regional crisis. Scribes hunched over pottery shards, recording every word, while advisors leaned in with quiet warnings. One sharp look from a vizier might mean, "If you go easy on this thief, the merchants will riot." Too harsh, and the farmers might stop working. The pharaoh had to weigh every outcome, knowing that justice wasn't just about fairness, it was about keeping the kingdom stable. Punishments were public and meant to send a message. For minor crimes, floggings or forced labor were common. For serious offenses, there were public executions. These weren't hidden away. They happened where everyone could see, a warning that royal justice was swift and unforgiving. The spectacle wasn't just about the criminal, it was about reminding everyone that the pharaoh's word was law, and breaking that law brought real consequences. Mercy was a dangerous game. Hatshepsut, for example, faced a tough choice when a nobleman stole from a temple. According to historian Charlotte Booth, she found a middle ground. She stripped him of property, but spared his life. This wasn't just kindness, it was strategy. Too much leniency could make the pharaoh look weak, but going too far could scare the elite into rebellion. Every verdict was a balancing act, and the stakes were high. Cases dragged on, with scribes scratching notes and families crowding the court, each side hoping for a sign of divine favor. Some disputes were straightforward, like catching a worker selling stolen goods. Others turned into messy inheritance battles, with relatives waving forged documents and accusing each other of lying. Through it all, the pharaoh had to keep a calm, distant expression. No sighs, no fidgeting, no hint that the pressure was getting to him. Foreign complaints added another layer of stress. When envoys from neighboring lands arrived with grievances, maybe about stolen cattle or disputed borders, the pharaoh had to choose between punishing his own people and risking unrest, or ignoring the complaint and risking war. Sometimes the answer was creative, like ordering both villages to build a new well together. Forced cooperation kept the peace, at least for a while. All of this took place under the eyes of the court, the gods, and anyone with enough status to attend. The pharaoh's authority rested not just on his decisions, but on the way he handled the endless stream of problems. And once court wrapped up, there was no time to relax. The next ordeal was waiting, moving through the city, surrounded by crowds with every eye watching for a sign of weakness. Travel for a pharaoh wasn't about comfort, it was about being seen, staying safe, and reminding everyone who was in charge. The sedan chair, a portable throne carried by servants, was the ancient version of a status symbol. No wheels, no horses, just long poles, a sturdy seat, and a team of people making sure the pharaoh stayed above the crowd. The sedan chair wasn't just transport, it was a rolling billboard for royal authority. And it wasn't just servants involved. Those fan bearers with their giant ostrich feathers weren't there for the heat. They were part of the security team, doubling as bodyguards who kept their eyes on the crowd as much as they did on the pharaoh. The closer a fan bearer stood, the more trusted they were. Some historians even think they'd proven their loyalty in life or death situations. Every journey through the city was a carefully planned event. The routes weren't random. Planners mapped them to pass through busy markets and by important temples, making sure as many people as possible got a glimpse of the living God. The point wasn't just to get to the next meeting. It was to reinforce the pharaoh's image, show off power, and remind people who filled the granaries. The sedan chair moved slowly on purpose, letting crowds study every detail of the pharaoh's outfit and jewelry. The best spots along the route went to nobles and officials, a not-so-subtle reminder of who paid their taxes. Security was always on everyone's mind. The threat of assassination was real, and not just a paranoid fantasy. Ramses III's harem conspiracy is a famous example. Plotters targeted him on his daily route, hoping to strike during a routine procession. After that, security got even tighter. The chairs became heavier, sometimes with extra wood to hide archers or guards underneath. Some pharaohs even had decoy chairs following behind, like ancient dummy limousines, making it harder for any would-be attackers to know which chair held the real king. Even the fans served more than one purpose. Sure, they looked impressive, but they also kept the crowds at a safe distance. If you got too close, you'd get smacked with a feather or nudged by a guard. The whole procession was about control, over the people, over the narrative, and over the pharaoh's own safety. Every step, every wave, every stop was part of the performance. Timing mattered too. Arriving too early or too late at a temple could set off rumors, and a single unscheduled pause could get the priests or the public talking. The pharaoh's children sometimes rode alongside, not for family bonding, but as a public display of succession planning. A visible heir meant stability. Rotating which child appeared kept the factions guessing. The entire procession was a mix of power play, crisis management, and propaganda. All this effort wasn't just for show. The next stop was often a construction site, another stage where the pharaoh's image and legacy were on the line. Building temples and monuments was the real test of a pharaoh's reputation. Ramses II especially made a career out of construction. His name is stamped on more stone than a modern celebrity's on Hollywood Boulevard. He didn't haul blocks or swing hammers, but he showed up to oversee the action and made sure everyone knew it. Artists waited for the right moment. Ramses would touch a block or lift a tool, and the scene would be immortalized on temple walls. These carvings didn't just show a king, they showed a ruler who looked like he could build Egypt by hand, even if he only posed for the part. For the workers, these visits were events. When the pharaoh arrived, everything stopped. Foremen made sure the crew cheered, and the pharaoh's help was exaggerated in art. In one mural, Ramses looks twice the size of everyone else, shown dragging a statue by himself. The message was clear. The pharaoh's power built the kingdom, literally and symbolically. But the reality was more complicated. The workforce was huge: stonemasons, carpenters, bakers, and water carriers. These projects gave out jobs, paid in bread and beer, and kept thousands busy. A busy worker wasn't plotting rebellion. Building wasn't just about monuments, it was social engineering. The economy thrived on these massive undertakings. Every new project meant more trade, more food, and more people with something to lose if things fell apart. The pharaoh's building spree kept everyone invested in the system. But the glory on the walls didn't show the full picture. Laborers worked under tough conditions, sometimes watched by guards. Some tried faking injuries to get a break, and there are hints that not everyone was there by choice. The propaganda painted a world of happy workers, but the truth was less perfect. Materials were part of the message. Limestone from local quarries was good, but imported granite from Aswan or cedar from Lebanon showed off the pharaoh's reach. Bright pigments made the buildings pop. Lapis lazuli blue was a favorite, not because it looked nice, but because it meant Egypt could afford to grind up precious stones for paint. Every color, every imported block was a flex. Not every project worked out. Akhenaten's city, Amarna, was supposed to change everything. It was built fast, filled with new temples and palaces, and then abandoned when his religious experiment failed. The ruins stood as a warning. Even a pharaoh's vision could collapse if it pushed too far. Mistakes were quietly erased. If a wall cracked or a statue broke, artists fixed the story in stone. Official records listed only victories, never defeats. If a pharaoh had a limp, the carving showed him running. The goal wasn't accuracy, it was legacy. Security at these sites was strict. Guards watched for sabotage, and even a small act of defiance could mean harsh punishment. One worker was executed for scratching a pharaoh's name backward, a reminder that even the smallest detail mattered. By the time the pharaoh left the site, he had reinforced his image as a builder and leader. All that effort, all those staged scenes, set the stage for the next big event of the day, a royal meal where the stakes were just as high and the risks came with every bite. Lunch in a pharaoh's palace wasn't just about eating, it was a statement. While most Egyptians got by on bread, beer, vegetables, and the occasional fish, the royal table overflowed with roast goose, bull, dates, figs, and wine. Every dish was a reminder of who controlled the land and the resources. The difference wasn't just about taste, it was a public show of power, designed to impress guests and remind everyone exactly where they stood in Egypt's food chain. Of course, the act of eating came with its own hazards. The threat of poison was always there, so pharaohs relied on food tasters. These weren't just loyal servants, they were human shields, sometimes even foreign prisoners, who sampled every bite and sip before the king did. Their job was simple: survive the meal. If someone collapsed, the rest of the food was cleared away. The presence of tasters was a constant reminder that even the most basic act, like eating lunch, required nerves of steel and a healthy dose of suspicion. Wine was the ultimate flex at these meals. Most Egyptians never tasted it, but the pharaoh poured it freely for special guests. Since good wine had to be imported from places like Canaan or Greece, uncorking a jar with the royal seal was a subtle way to show off Egypt's connections. The oldest and rarest bottles were reserved for diplomatic banquets, signaling to foreign envoys that they were in the presence of someone who could command luxuries from across the known world. The menu itself was a carefully curated piece of propaganda. Out-of-season fruits, proof that the pharaoh could bend nature, or at the very least, had the best supply network in the region. A whole roasted ox meant he controlled the herds. Even the most impressive dishes like gazelle or exotic birds were sometimes staged, caught, and kept ready for the right moment, just to create the illusion of abundance and mastery over the wild. Seating at these banquets was never random. The closer you sat to the pharaoh, the more important or more dangerous your position. Viziers and trusted generals got prime spots, while anyone under suspicion might find themselves at the far end of the hall, out of earshot and under watchful eyes. Cleopatra understood the power of a meal better than most. Her famous pearl and vinegar stunt wasn't just a party trick. It was a calculated distraction during tense negotiations, letting her team keep an eye on the room while everyone else stared at her. Nothing went to waste. After the feast, servants packaged leftovers as gifts, jars of honey for loyal officials, baskets of fine bread for favored soldiers. Even the scraps became tokens of royal favor, their value magnified by association. Every detail of the royal meal was about control, spectacle, and survival. The pharaoh's power depended on being seen as untouchable, but every bite was a reminder of how quickly that could change. And once the plates were cleared, there was no time to relax. The next event on the royal schedule demanded just as much theater. Only this time, the stakes involved more than just a full stomach. Lion hunts were a main event on the pharaoh's schedule, but not for the reasons you'd think. These weren't dangerous tests of survival. They were tightly controlled displays of strength, designed to remind everyone who was in charge. The pharaoh didn't need more food, he needed another story carved onto a temple wall. Game masters handled the logistics, catching lions ahead of time and keeping them in enclosures until the big day. Some historians even think the animals were drugged to keep things safe and predictable. The goal wasn't to risk the king's life, it was to make sure he looked like he conquered chaos every single time. The setup was pure theater. When it was time to hunt, handlers released a tired, often underfed lion into a walled arena. The pharaoh would arrive in a chariot, holding a blunted spear, more for show than for any real danger. Everything was staged to make the king look heroic. There were always people just out of sight, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Amenhotep III claimed to have killed over 100 lions, but when you realize his staff likely bred them for this purpose, it takes the edge off the achievement. Murals from these events tell a carefully edited story. You see the pharaoh in dramatic poses, muscles flexed, driving a spear into a roaring beast. What you don't see are the handlers with ropes, the tired lion that could barely stand, or the fact that the wild animal might have spent its life in a palace zoo. The entire event was about reinforcing the pharaoh's image as a master of nature and chaos. Failures didn't make it onto the walls. If a hunt went wrong or a chariot tipped over, the official record left it out. Tutankhamun's tomb shows him returning from an ostrich hunt, but x-rays of his body suggest he suffered a broken leg, possibly from a staged hunt gone sideways. Nobody wrote that part down. The props mattered as much as the action. Spears were tipped with soft gold, not meant for real combat. Chariots were decked out with images of past victories, and even the horses were trained to rear up on cue. The audience was just as important as the hunt itself. Nobles and foreign guests watched from the stands, seeing exactly what the pharaoh wanted them to see: a ruler who could defeat any threat, even if the threat was half asleep and surrounded by guards. After the hunt, the meat was distributed to temples, and the story spread far and wide. Scribes exaggerated the numbers, artists adjusted the angles, and everyone went home with a clear message. The pharaoh controlled everything, even the wildest animals. These events happened often, sometimes timed with tax collection or political ceremonies, just to make sure nobody forgot who kept order in Egypt. But the arena wasn't the only place where power plays happened. Back inside the palace, another kind of contest was always underway, one with even higher stakes and a lot more scheming. Managing a harem as a pharaoh wasn't a luxury, it was a full-time job with high stakes. The harem was a living scoreboard for power and wealth. The chief wife usually came from a powerful Egyptian family, securing the home front. The rest? Foreign princesses, each one a living treaty, sent from neighboring kingdoms as part of diplomatic deals. Every new arrival meant another alliance to juggle and another round of politics. If you thought family dinners were awkward, imagine a room where every guest's father has an army. The harem wasn't some lounge for pampered wives. It was a tightly controlled environment, more like a high-security residence than a romantic retreat. Wives and concubines lived in separate quarters, watched over by eunuchs whose main job was to monitor everything and report back to the pharaoh. The favorites got better rooms and more gifts, which only fueled jealousy and competition. Information was currency. Servants and eunuchs managed access, scheduled visits, and made sure every whisper made its way up the chain. Visits from the pharaoh weren't spontaneous. Advisors arranged everything, balancing political needs with personal alliances. If a foreign envoy was in town, his daughter might get a visit to keep the peace. If a noble family was getting restless, their daughter's place in the rotation might suddenly improve. Even intimacy was transactional, and everyone knew it. The pharaoh's calendar was a chessboard, with every move watched by people hoping for an advantage. Children raised the stakes even higher. The main wife's son was usually the heir, but every lesser wife wanted her child to be next in line. Ambition ran deep. Some pharaohs, like Thutmose III, sent their sons to distant military posts to keep them out of the capital and out of trouble. Others weren't so lucky. Family feuds sometimes turned deadly. The harem conspiracy that killed Ramses III started with a wife who wanted her son on the throne, showing just how far these rivalries could go. Cleopatra played the family game harder than anyone. She used her brothers as stepping stones, marrying and outmaneuvering them to secure her own rule. Her alliances with Roman leaders weren't about romance, they were about survival and power, with every relationship calculated to keep her on top. Even the staff had influence. Eunuchs controlled the flow of information and access to the wives, holding the keys to secrets and schedules. Security was always tight. Food was checked for poison, and guards kept a close eye on every visitor. Some pharaohs rotated their sleeping quarters, never letting anyone know where they'd be at night. By the end of the day, the pharaoh's biggest threats were often inside the palace walls. Every alliance, every visit, every child was a potential risk. Even resting required a strategy, because in Egypt, the most dangerous time for a king was when he let his guard down. Night in the palace brought a different kind of tension. Palaces functioned like fortresses with thick walls, guarded gates, and, in some cases, hidden escape routes built for emergencies. Archaeologists have found evidence of secret corridors and passages. These weren't for midnight strolls. They were for getting out fast if things went wrong. Security wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about making sure the pharaoh could disappear if the palace turned hostile. Bodyguards were everywhere, but trust was always in short supply. The same guards who stood watch at the doors could be plotting with rivals or family members. To lower the risk of betrayal, guards often rotated shifts frequently, making it harder for any one group to form alliances or hatch a plan. Even so, the threat never went away. One wrong look or a hint of divided loyalty could mean a quick end to a guard's career. Or worse, servants weren't immune to suspicion either. Anyone who got close to the pharaoh, from hairdressers to cupbearers, faced heavy scrutiny. Oaths of loyalty were standard, and some staff had to swear by multiple gods before they could even set foot in the royal chambers. Food and drink were never served without a tester taking the first bite or sip. Sometimes more than one taster was used, just in case. The pharaoh's meals were as much about survival as they were about luxury. Family members were the most complicated threat of all. Tutankhamun's mysterious injuries and early death have fueled endless theories about possible foul play from his own advisors or relatives. Thutmose III didn't just erase Hatshepsut's name from history, he had artisans chip her image off monuments as a warning to anyone who might challenge his rule. The line between family and enemy was always thin, and the stakes were as high as they could get. Even sleep wasn't a break from danger. Bedtime meant extra security, not relaxation. Some pharaohs kept daggers close at hand. There are stories of rulers using decoy beds or switching rooms to keep would-be assassins guessing. The staff never knew where the real king would be, and that was the point. Priests read royal dreams as omens, and a bad night's sleep could mean a very bad day for someone at court. Palace architecture made paranoia a permanent feature. Windows sat high to block arrows, gardens were trimmed for clear sightlines, and pools had grated drains to keep attackers from sneaking in. Some rooms had no corners, just to avoid giving anyone a place to hide. The buildings themselves were designed to remind everyone, especially the pharaoh, that safety was never guaranteed. Morning started with a head count. If a servant didn't show up, people wondered if it was illness or something much worse. Surviving the night was just another box to tick before the next round of rituals, meetings, and threats. In ancient Egypt, the job of pharaoh wasn't about living in luxury. It was about surviving long enough to rule another day. And if you still think the pharaohs had it easy, it might be time to reconsider what those golden masks were really hiding. Being a pharaoh meant living under constant pressure, not just from enemies, but from the expectations of the entire kingdom. Diodorus described their days as tightly regulated, packed with rituals to uphold Ma'at and endless decisions that could make or break Egypt. Every so-called privilege, from elaborate banquets to staged lion hunts, was just another way to reinforce their fragile grip on power. Fear was a tool, not a choice. The harem conspiracy that ended Ramses III's reign and the strict routines show how pharaohs balanced being feared and loved, often at a personal cost. The gold mask hides the wearer's constant pressure to project power day and night. If you want more reality check history, hit like and subscribe. It's a lot easier than running a kingdom on no sleep.